Hello and welcome to this video. Today we're going to talk about plotting versus pantsing and my experience with both. So let's get started. So let's first give a brief little introduction to what exactly plotting and pantsing even means. Most writers and authors out there already probably know what this is, but this is just kind of my brief little summary of each. So plotting a book is basically when you have an outline of exactly what you want to happen in your book. There's varying degrees of plotting a book. So you could either have like a very scant general outline all the way to exactly every single minuscule detail that's going to go into a book, which again, it really just depends on your type of writing for that. Pantsing, on the other hand, is kind of the other end of the spectrum where you have no idea where the book is going to go. You have either a general idea or you have a general vibe. In my case, sometimes it's just even you have one scene idea and you work a whole plot around it. That's basically the baby author version of what plotting and pantsing means. There's going to be pros and cons, and it really highly depends on what kind of author, what kind of writer you are. It could be anything from you like knowing exactly what's going to happen as it's going to happen versus you feel like that stifles your creativity and you can't even imagine trying to limit yourself in that way. So the pros and cons are going to be very dependent. Where my experience comes in with this is, hi, my name is Elizabeth. I am an author, an indie author. So I currently have one book that is published under my name, which is Tosca. It's a literary fiction. And I have another book that's coming out, hopefully the end of this year, early next year at the latest, under my pen name, which is Lee Creek, and that is the Pen Name Project. And I have a third book that I'm working on right now. So I'm about midway through working on that at the moment. So those are my credentials, so to speak. So what does that mean in terms of my experience with plotting and pantsing? Well, Tosca was very much pantsed. Pen Name Project was very much pantsed. Project TF, which is what I'm working on currently, has moved towards the plotting aspect of preparing it in advance. And I think I'm moving towards that end of the spectrum. And let me explain why for me. I've mentioned this before in other videos and all that. I am a much more type A person. I get very stressed when I don't know certain details in advance. And when I was writing Tosca, I was working through a lot of dark emotions. It's a book about depression. It's a book about anxiety. So it's not a happy, fluffy little book. It's a literary fiction, check it out. But there's a reason why I don't talk about it a whole ton. And it's because it's a very dark book that I used to help myself work through a lot of things. That said, it was pantsed because I had exactly one thing that I knew about the book. And it's a thing I can't really say because it's going to spoil something, but it was a particular dynamic. And it was a particular dynamic that I had envisioned for years and years and years. And it was a concept that just didn't leave me alone. And that's what turned into the book itself. So I had an idea that I eventually turned into a plot, but I didn't know what that plot was going to be when I first started it, which is why it probably took me so long. So I started with the idea. I kind of went along with it, so to speak, and kind of followed the narrative as I started to actually build out some sort of plot. As I started, I sort of followed the characters to see where it would lead me. And it worked out for that book in particular because it was me processing stuff. So it made sense that I was figuring out a lot of my own emotions as the character was figuring out her emotions. So it would make sense that a book like that would be pantsed. And then I move on to the Pen Name Project. The Pen Name Project is a contemporary rom-com, spicy rom-com that I'm, again, putting under my pen name. And that one was also pantsed. And that didn't work out as well as it had for Tosca. And that reason why, it's a contemporary rom-com. It's fun, it's lighthearted. There are some serious moments and there are some serious aspects that happen in it, but I'm not processing my own feelings and emotions, which, I mean, again, you put a little, as an author, as a writer, you put a little bit of yourself into each of your books and that kind of thing. But you're not particularly working on very deep, dark emotions through a rom-com. At least I hope not. But when I started the Pen Name Project, I had an idea. It was the same thing along the lines of Tosca. I had an idea and I really liked it, and I wanted to go along with the characters. And the first draft versus the last draft, the one that is hopefully coming out soon, completely different. Completely different. Absolutely different plot lines, completely different dynamics. There are more characters that I ended up having to take out because they just didn't make sense to the plot, and like all these different things. And it caused me a lot of stress in the moment, and it caused me a lot of anxiety because I didn't know what I was doing with these characters. And I feel, in hindsight, I feel like if I had plotted it out in advance, I probably wouldn't have spent like 5 or 6 drafts to get through to where I am happy with it. Like, I'm thrilled with how it's turned out and I'm really proud of it. But I probably would have saved myself some heartache if I had plotted it in advance. So there's always going to be pros and cons with plotting versus pantsing and all of that. But I think what I learned through Pen Name was that I wanted to try plotting a little bit more in advance so that I had at least something to follow along to, so that I wasn't like having to flip back through like, oh, what did I put over here? And oh, what did I put over here? And all this other stuff. So I think that's what I learned from the Pen Name project. Now, coming into Project TF, which is I'm currently in the midst of, so I can't say with 100% guarantee what it has worked and what hasn't worked with it yet because I'm still working on it. What I'm learning and taking away from this process is I'm starting to become more of a plotter versus a pantser. Even with this general outline, it hasn't worked in certain areas, and I've learned and I've made mistakes with it, and I've had to revise it, and I'm working with a critique partner out now on it. But I think what I'm learning through this entire process is that it's easy for me to get really bogged down in adding this and adding that and adding this and adding and adding and adding and adding until I have no idea where the plot went. So having some sort of even just general overview of what I'm doing has been helpful because it's kind of helped me keep on track and not like steer in like 500 different directions, which I did do with the Pen Name project. And like the very first draft, and I might make a video after it's published, I might make a video about it, but the first draft of the Pen Name project was an absolute disaster because the main plot of the book didn't even focus on the main characters. It was like one of the side characters, a character that I don't even have anymore, she was going through this really tough situation, and then the 2 main characters were kind of just along for the ride. So it really didn't make sense when you're trying to like look at a rom-com, like you're focusing on the main character. So I had to take a lot out. And again, I think it was a fantastic learning experience. If anything else, it was a fantastic learning experience. So something else to consider is what genre you want to write in. Because as I mentioned before, I wrote a literary fiction and I wrote a rom-com. I did the exact same approach with both, but came out with 2 entirely different thought processes when I was finished. With Tosca, I had just the idea. I went in, I was processing feelings and emotions and, trying to grow as a human being through the process. So I came out on the other end pantsing it. But even though I was frustrated with certain elements of the book itself, that wasn't the ultimate goal for me. The ultimate goal was to process and to have this creative outlet and to try something I had never tried, which is to actually write a book that I wrote by myself. And then with the Pen Name project, that was the first book I wrote where I had the intention of this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. This is what I want to be as an author. I want to write books. I want to enjoy the process, but I want to write books so that other people can enjoy it and I can still have a creative outlet at the same time. So I went in with that approach, came out with the opposite that I had with Tosca, which is, I mean, I'm 33. I know what a rom-com is. I've seen them, I've read them, I love them, all that kind of stuff. But figuring out the little details that go into making a story, especially a romance, because I obviously had not written a romance yet. So figuring out the little details and all that go into something like that is completely different than what I had to think of before, because with Tosca, it was in first person. Pen Name Project, it's in third person, which I like writing in both for different reasons, but that's another factor for me is that I also had switched point of views, and that affected how the plot progresses, how the story sounds, how the narrative is set up. it was a little bit more complicated for the third person, which I think it works better third person. Personally, I think it works better third person for the pen name project. You know, when you're trying to pants something and you can't even really depend on your inner thoughts or the character's inner thoughts as kind of a way to go forward, and you have to kind of narrate a little bit more in a different way, is complicated. And it adds another layer of complication to what you're trying to do. So when you're trying to factor in, you know, whether you want to try plotting or pantsing, that is something you have to consider. So going into Project TF, it's another third person narrative. So I was like, okay, well, I didn't enjoy the whole process for the other book. I didn't enjoy, you know, having no plot, or not no plot, but I didn't enjoy pantsing it as much. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try plotting it. I'm going to try having a more, like, a very loose outline, which it's worked in some ways and hasn't worked in other ways. So I really went in with kind of a, I'm going to see where the plot goes, but here's where I'm hoping it's going to go. I think in the future, I'm going to have to go even deeper into outlining and plotting in advance, because it had kind of a different ending, had a different kind of feel to certain areas. But once you actually get writing, that's when it starts to get a little bit more real, because it's what, at least for me, this is my experience, at least for me, it's completely different in your head versus on paper. So when it's in my head and I'm initially plotting things out for this, I was like, okay, this is what I want, blah, 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 blah. Actually writing it, the characters have changed a little bit. The narrative has, I mean, it's still third person, but the narrative has changed a little bit. I've focused on certain areas. I've kind of let the characters still lead me where they want me to take them. And I think as a writer, that's still a good thing to have in your tool belt, is to let your characters kind of take you along for the journey as well. But with that said, I think I let them get a little too wild. So it's been a little bit more difficult wrangling them in to fit into a plot where I had originally had it going. So that's been something I think I'm going to take away into the next project that I work on when I finish this one, is that I think I need to think a little bit more advanced in terms of how I want the story to go. Because if I don't have that, the characters are just going to absolutely go buck wild in my experience. So having a more detailed, more well thought out narrative in advance, so I can be like, okay, point A, point B, point C, all the way down to point Z, everything is going to make sense because I've already thought in advance, which that's the, I think the key takeaway is that you have to figure out how much in advance you want to deal with your book before you actually start writing it. If you really want to plan in advance, that's the plotting. You're going to want to plot, because if you want to have everything ironed out, ready to go, all you got to do is just put the words in and call it a day. That's plotting. If you want to 100% just start with a vibe and let the characters take you where you go, and you just kind of figure things out as you go, that is pantsing. So that has been my experience so far with both of these elements. So let me know in the comments which of those two you guys tend to be, and why you tend to be that way, and where you think you're going to be going here in the future. So that is it for today's video, and I will see you guys again in the next one.